What is up, everybody? Wednesday night, 7:30, 7:31. Apologies. It's always on me. This is the Shout Buffalo Bills football podcast. Welcome in to this salary cap special edition of the Buffalo football podcast. He's Ryan Talbot. I'm Matt Perino. We, as always, will be here to guide you through the show, but we're bringing on a couple experts. And the first one, nationally speaking, I mean, this guy is going on the tour right now in terms of radio hits. I've really tried to catch up with a lot of his podcasts recently. Mike Ginnetti from Spotrac.com. He'll be up here first. And, he's going on all over the place, getting asked all the, salary cap questions as we kind of wade through these uncertain waters ahead of free agency. We're going to dive into a lot of what Brandon Beane has in front of him with Mike here over the next half hour. And then at 8:00, a local expert that has really become, risen to the forefront of this salary cap discussion in terms of Bills Mafia. And that's Greg Tompsett from Cover One. I love following his feed this time of year. He's always got different, ideas and ways that the Bills can attack this thing. And we'll kind of tap into that tonight. If you haven't checked out Cover One's Greg, his salary cap special, it's 2 hours. I dove into it the other night. It's a really good and educational watch. I definitely recommend it. Ryan Talbot, how are you tonight, my friend?
Hey, I'm doing great. I'm really excited about this show. Like you said, it's an exciting time of the year. We're already seeing a lot of teams around the league cutting players to save some cap space. You're going to see some restructures. So I'm really excited to kind of dive right into this Bills roster and see what some of the options are for this team.
I'm going out of town this weekend. So if JJ Watt decides he's going to decide on a team, and it's really going to be the Buffalo Bills, because I'm going out of town on Friday. I'm bringing my computer, but I was telling you, I'm taking my son down to Cooperstown to check out the Baseball Hall of Fame. And I was actually looking at the map because my wife is a history and geography teacher, and I don't know why she married me, because I know nothing of geography, and I lived here for 35 years. And I was kind of checking it out because I think we're going to take Route 20 and kind of drop down and take the kind of scenic route instead of going on the 90. You get kind of bored of that. And I was going to see, like, how close is that to Olean, Salamanca? Maybe give a high five to my podcast partner. It's really not feasible. No. It's kind of out of the way.
very, very much so. But I appreciate the thought. Oh, that's fantastic.
But yeah, I think that, funny, like, you texted me earlier today and you said, hey, did you see Mike Clayton's report or John Clayton's report on JJ Watt? And I said, you know what? It's probably going to happen. Perfect timing this weekend as I leave town, because why wouldn't it? But we'll get plenty into JJ Watt tonight. But in the green room right now is Mr. Mike Ginnetti. We're going to bring him in from Spotrac.com. Mike, thank you so much for taking the time tonight. How are you?
Hey, guys. My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Oh, anytime. I mean, I was just talking about it at the top of the show, and I follow your feed a little bit more closely this time of year, and you do great work. But man, where are you catching some winks right now? Because it seems like you're going on every show all over the place.
Yeah, I just hopped off a Jacksonville conversation, so it's about 4 to 5 shows a day, and it's kind of rapid fire. So it's fun this time of year. I love doing it because I'm already invested in the data. I'm doing it 24/7 right now, so I might as well talk about it and talk shop, right?
Mm-hmm. And how did you, out of curiosity myself, how did you get into this? And like, when you first started the website, did you realize how it would become this kind of one-stop shop for everybody in terms of salary cap and free agency education?
No, this was supposed to be a fun little blog for baseball salaries, because that's what I geeked out on 15 years ago. So when the NFL locked out in 2010 and everything kind of went haywire, and then this hard cap came in and the new CBA, and nobody knew what the heck was going on. So I just said, I'm going to just take a whole summer with no sports really and just dive into this thing. And I kind of wrapped my head around it and met some people that could help me with it. And the interest was unbelievable. I mean, the amount of people that cared, or at least had interest in what somebody made, and then how it broke down, and then what was going to be next, and the evaluation process, totally snowballed. So it's not just the NFL; it's mostly the NFL, but every sport has this now, and it's like a fabric of life.
That's awesome. And it's so cool to hear those kind of stories because how these things evolve over time, I think it's the fun in it. I mean, I talk to people all the time that are, in the content creation world and, 5 years ago, probably never would have thought to, have a role in all of this. So it's super cool. I wanted to start off with just your general impressions of the job that Brandon Beane has done. You're studying all this all the time about what works, what doesn't in the NFL and all these leagues. And it's the blueprint that he's kind of laid out. I feel like over the course of the next couple seasons, you're going to see other GMs, like first-time GMs, maybe try to emulate this a little bit. What have been your impressions about the job that Beane has done to kind of build this roster?
It's funny. We had such a bad run, the Bills, with front office situations and bad contracts. And then the Darius contract hit, and it felt like there was no coming back from that. I mean, that was such a poorly structured contract in terms of the early guarantees. I mean, it's remnants of the Rams and the Eagles and what they're going through now with their situation. So the only way out was just to take it, was just to say, we've got to push through this thing and start over. He's absolutely the perfect candidate for this, because you can tell the second he got here that it was about his situation. I'm going to clean out everything that looks bad, whether they're players or not. And how many of those players that left did anything? Anything. It was clearly just about fixing the cap, and then I'll know what to do after that, and we'll have the right discussions with the right people. But the first impression was rough, because it was, they signed a fullback to a 4-year deal, like more than half guaranteed. They signed Star Latulele to a contract in like an hour and a half, March 13th, when defensive tackles were getting $900,000 a year and Star's getting $10 million a year, right? It was a really bad start for me from a money standpoint, because I thought he was just going to be the next guy throwing dollars around. He has completely come around. I mean, the structures of the contracts are modernized. They're front loaded to some degree. That's what you want to see out of the guy right now. He took a terrible cap situation, took a $90 million dead cap hit year one, cleaned it out, made the right trades, somehow traded Darius, somehow traded Watkins when they were absolutely low value, and has completely turned things around. Everything he's doing right now just seems to be something everyone else is trying to model, including the Diggs trade.
And now it seems like this year is going to be his biggest challenge yet, because with the salary cap being lower than expected, he actually recently appeared on a podcast saying that, they thought they're going to be pretty healthy going into this year, when he thought the cap would be around 210, 215. But that's not the case now. So what are your thoughts in terms of how the cap could have been, and in terms of what the Bills could have done if it would have been a normal year, based on what Brandon Beane might have to do now? Yeah,
you can tell this was a 4-year process, and how you can tell is how he staggered these players. Last year was clearly Tre'Davious White's year, Deion Dawkins' year to some degree. He's got a plan, and my guess was the plan this year was either going to be Josh Allen or Tremaine Edmonds. Maybe both, if the cap had risen properly and things fell properly for him in terms of his other pieces. Moving on from John Brown, things like that. I don't know that you can do both right now, and maybe you can't do either. And that's a bad situation to get in. You don't want to get into 5th-year options too much right now, especially with the fact that they're now fully guaranteed at exercise. So there's my guess is that's what he's talking about. It's not so much about adding additional pieces, and I'm sure Milano's in this conversation as well. He wasn't probably anticipating having to go 15 million on his non-rushed edge, linebacker, but everything's come up. And what's not coming down while the league cap is the cost for a quarterback, or the cost for a captain of the defense, or the cost for a cornerback number one. So he's had to pay these market value contracts out, and now it's a situation where he's on pause. And I'm not sure that he gets either of those major contracts done, and I'm pretty sure that means Milano walks as well. So yeah, I think a lot of guys had things planned that are going to be backtracking right now.
There's like a couple ways that, you've been talking about on your podcasts, and, you kind of see sprinkled across social media and different posts about how general managers can kind of free up space. And I think that's one of the areas where, there's some confusion and maybe lack of understanding within fan base about what kind of tools are at Brandon Beane's disposal. So I want to kind of throw a couple different contract types at you. And I wanted to start with John Brown, because I feel like he's kind of that, cut candidate number one, because of all the money that you can add back. What are the possibilities there? Is it a situation where the money is so good, getting back almost $8 million, that just cutting him and moving on makes sense? Or is there some restructurability to a guy like him, or even a Jerry Hughes who has 1 year left on his deal?
Right. Very different situations, in my opinion, because I think Hughes has a lot of value. And I think John Brown's role is somewhat reduced right now. There's a lot of things against John Brown's situation. I think his cap hit is too high. I think his overall salary is too high, and it's a phenomenal draft / free agent class of wide receivers, one of the best we've seen. So everything's against him right now in terms of his current positioning. It's pretty clear to me that Brandon Beane is not a restructure fan. He's going to do that when he has to, but he's not the kind of guy that he's not going to be, Howie Roseman in Philadelphia or Mickey Loomis in New Orleans that uses that as a part of their cap management. He's going to have to this year. I don't think John Brown is the right candidate for that. You don't want to be pushing dead cap or more guarantees into 2022 when there's a lot of unknowns with their wide receiver core going forward next year. Jerry Hughes, different story. If he thinks Jerry Hughes can give him, number 2 rusher potential, you restructure and extend Jerry Hughes for just like you did a year and a half ago, and you give him a little signing bonus and you keep going from there, or a front-loaded roster bonus. I thought the way he's handled a few of the aging players is spot on. You don't want to get in a situation where 4 or 5 of your major meat players are plus 30 and you're restructuring $20 million down the road, which is what we've seen already for the past 2 weeks across the league. You've got to be able to manage not only your cap, but your cash flow, and you don't want to be paying, players to go away. Something we're starting to see more and more of for teams who just don't care. Brandon Beane cares. And he's got a plan with every single one of his players. It's very, very obvious. To me, and I've seen this now in the other sports, especially with baseball, but a lot in the NBA, which is, hands out dollars. A lot of players are going to be caught under the fact that we're just going to outright release you because we know we can get you back cheaper. We know we can start over with this whole contract and it's going to be cheaper. Even if he's at $9 million, we think we can get you at 5.5 or 6. Because there's not going to be a market for you for $9 million anywhere else right now. So you're just going to see some guys get outright released because of the current cap situation.
So what about a pay cut? I know the release you could re-sign, but what about a pay cut for a John Brown where he could earn maybe some of that money back in terms of incentives? Because you just said it, this free agent class is loaded, but the Bills aren't in a position to go out and try to get any of those guys that are going to be making $10, $12 million. Maybe they're not quite sure if Gabriel Davis can take on that full load as the number 2 receiver. So having John Brown for 1 more year at around $5 million, for instance, is better than outright releasing him. So is a pay cut something that could also be on the table?
I actually don't. I'm not a fan. I'm not a fan of the link of the optics of it, from team to agent, from team to player. I think once you start doing that, once that starts getting public that you're asking players to take pay cuts, it becomes a thing. It becomes a stamp on your resume. I think it's much, much easier, and you're doing the right thing for the player to just let him walk. Just say, hey, we can't make this current contract work. We'd love to have you back. We're going to give you the opportunity to go out and find a payday somewhere else, maybe a better situation for you somewhere else. I just think his production is replaceable. And you're not going to have to break the bank. You're going to be able to find cap space to bring in somebody to replace John Brown's production, with whether that's a 4th-round pick or something like that. But I never have liked the optics of a pay cut. Now I understand it if you're 35, and you're just trying to hang on, and we can build some bonuses in for you can make it back. But I've never liked the optics of a good contract being asked to be cut when you could just start over. And I think that's where we're going with a lot of these players.
I wanted to ask you about, you mentioned starting over, and, going into this offseason, Brandon Beane said there's going to be a lot of tough decisions. And I think that the first thing you think of if you're a fan is, Matt Milano coming up as a free agent, Daryl Williams, maybe those are the tough decisions. But as you kind of get along here, you start to realize that maybe some of the tough decisions that he was talking about is moving on from some of the guys that you brought in as recently as last year. And 3 of those guys right now that I think are, top candidates to maybe figure out a way to either restructure or move on from. And I want to get your thoughts on this. And I'm actually bringing up Spotrac.com right now because it is a great tool. And if you're not using it and you are an NFL or sports fan, you're missing out. Mario Addison, Quentin Jefferson, Vernon Butler. Give me your thoughts on that kind of, trio of players and what maybe pecking order of either restructuring or moving on.
I have to think Butler's out. To me, that's the easy one. And the reason being is you're kind of getting a free agent signing with Star coming back. So to me, that's just replaceable right off the top. Star's somewhat cheaper. I think he's a little bit better. He's got a little bit more of a ceiling right now. He's probably fresh after a year off. So to me, that's a no-brainer. You clear that and you move forward. The edge rush guys, look, there's some bonuses due on a couple of these players, some smaller roster bonuses and things like that. Otherwise, to me, it's easy. You just hold on and see how your draft goes. Because look, the edge rushers about to hit the open market, they rival this wide receiver class. There are some serious names that are going to hit this market because the teams that they're leaving can't even afford to franchise tag them right now. So it's a really weird year for the teams that haven't managed their cap with flexibility. And it's going to be a very fruitful year for some teams that are either in the middle of the pack or, have a ton of cap room right now, because we just never see 7 legitimate, sack the quarterback players hit the open market, along with, again, a decent draft class over the first couple of rounds. So if I had to guess with the latter two, he probably holds on to them and eats the roster bonuses if he has to, just to get himself into June, just to see what happens in the draft, who falls to them later in the first, unless, if they trade out, things like that. But there's options. There's options to replace them. So they're certainly on the bubble, but you don't want to gut your pass rush, just like you don't want to gut your offensive line. I mean, those are two situations that were extremely evident last year with the postseason teams. I just think that it's easier to keep them right now and add a little bit of dead cap versus missing out on a free agent or missing out on a draft pick that you have on your board right now and then having to scramble in August.
Now, if the Bills do sign J.J. Watt, does that make moving on from Addison that much easier, or is it, again, maybe hold on, just wait and see?
No, those are simultaneous moves right there.
Okay.
I mean, you're going to have to free up some space to get Watt on the door, because it sounds like that price. Look, I've heard $9 million out there, and I've heard $15 million out there. So I'm just kind of I'm under the impression that it's going to be one of either. That's the spectrum. I assume the Browns are at the high end of this. So, if the Bills are in, Brandon Beane doesn't overpay. He just flat out doesn't overpay for free agents, whether you're J.J. Watt or a C free agent. So if they get him in the door, they're going to be a counter move, maybe two. Maybe he takes up the spot of both of those guys we're talking about here, because then you can go into the draft with a little bit more comfort, knowing you have at least your top 2 rushers in the room. But no question, J.J. Watt pushes one of those guys out the door.
I was listening to your show, I believe it was last week, and you guys were talking about Watt and where you anticipated the number landing at about in the middle of that at about 12 per season. Where, with the way that this thing has transpired, where are you at there now? And how, it seems like this deal is not necessarily imminent from reports that we're seeing the last couple of days. How much of that has to do with the salary cap situation and the fact that we still don't know a definitive number?
It's a good question. I think there's 2 things out there. One is that there's 12 teams involved. So his agent's probably doing just a ton of work right now to figure out fit, money, structure, guarantee, all that stuff, where his family wants to live. And the second thing is I wouldn't be surprised if J.J. Watt has said to the right people, I'm not signing anything until this situation in Texas calms down. I'm not going to be the guy signing a $60 million contract to leave Texas when this state that I've pumped in so many years to is really reeling right now because of the disaster. So I think that's part of it. There's a bit of a pause with the Texas situation, and there's just a lot of offers out there. To me, the biggest thing with J.J. Watt, because he's made his money, there's no question about that. It's not going to be about who offers just the overall top value. There's a lot more to it. Does he even want a multi-year contract? Does he want to make this next spot home, or is it more about, I just want to be on a contender, more of an NBA situation? I just want to be on a contender every single year, and if I'm going to a situation in Green Bay where Aaron Rodgers might be out the door after 2022, I'm not signing a 4-year deal. Maybe it's a 1-year deal with a 2nd-year option to go along with the cap situation that we have right now. So it's really hard to kind of get into his brain right now. But my guess is that's why there's a little bit of a pause.
Now, you mentioned Josh Allen a little bit earlier in terms of maybe the Bills not being able to get his extension done this year with the cap and everything. But obvious benefit aside, getting a contract done earlier just makes sense because every year the price of quarterback goes up. Based on his play this past season, how high did his average salary go from what was expected to where it would be now based on his play from 2020?
The people that I follow closely with this stuff, this is the spectrum of what Josh Allen did last year. He was I'm not even sure they're going to exercise the 5th-year option to 41 million a year. And you can say the same about Baker Mayfield, by the way. He did the exact same thing this year, just not to the level that Josh Allen did it. Maybe even more drastic for Baker. Baker was maybe a cut trade candidate before 2020. That's how bad his first 2 years really kind of went. So Allen did himself, as much as possible outside of just outright winning that Super Bowl. And I can't imagine a world where his contract is less than 40 million right now.
It's truly amazing. It's funny. We talk about, Josh Allen so much on the show for obvious reasons, and the optics of it. And this goes back to, you mentioned, I think in media circles that those questions were being asked, but I think that, from a player perspective, this kind of was anticipated for Josh. So I think that's so interesting now, the optics on both of those guys. And, as we move forward, how much do you feel like, I think it's easy to sit here and say that good quarterbacks attract free agents, but do you feel like a quarterback like Josh Allen, who elevates to MVP caliber status, that's something that could be the difference maker in a JJ Watt decision, or even somebody else out there that, maybe nobody's even talking about right now?
Yeah. You know what I think really did the trick and why the Bills have to be a top 3 candidate for a player like Watt or any notable free agent this year? The situation with Stefon Diggs, not so much that it worked from a production standpoint, but that this kid who was somewhat embattled in Minnesota, right? He was falling out of favor, not only with the team, with the front office, but with the fan base because of things he was saying. He comes into the Bills Mafia situation and the Bills community and under Brandon Beane's tutelage and Sean McDermott, of course. And he's a whole different kind of kid. And he embraces Josh Allen and he embraces the offense. That is, exhibit A, that even some random player off the street can come in and be immediately embraced and obviously produce because of it. So to me, it's that veteran pickup from Stefon Diggs, taking Josh Allen kind of under his wing, and now those two are the faces of this franchise on every media outlet. They are linked at the hip. That says a lot more to me than Josh Allen alone standing out there in an AFC Championship game. It's about Josh Allen's ability to play with anybody, to get along with anybody. Obviously, that goes a long way, especially with a situation like JJ Watt, where clearly things got ugly in the locker room with the coaching staff. He's looking for more of a home in terms of football, and that's what Allen and Diggs, to me, that's what they give off.
Now, you mentioned that Matt Milano probably priced himself out of Buffalo's market. What about a guy like Daryl Williams, who Buffalo was able to get at a bargain rate last year? What could he be looking at this year in free agency? And is it something that you think the Bills could end up matching or trying to bring him back for?
Yeah, you're talking $2 million to what could be 12. And I think he's an $8 million player. If I put it in my formula, he's an $8 to $9 million player. But I know too much to say that that's going to be the case, because if Taylor Moton gets the franchise tag from Carolina, like I believe he will, there's a world where Daryl Williams is the best right tackle on the free agent market. He did enough last year to give himself that kind of designation. And right tackles now basically make $15 million. Your great ones are upwards of 16 to 17. That's where Taylor's going to live. So realistically, knowing what he made last year, knowing that he's a little bit older, I think on a free agent market, he's worth 12 right now to a lot of teams. Jacksonville. Why wouldn't Jacksonville want to do whatever they can to protect, Trevor Lawrence after what we saw with Joe Burrow last year? Jacksonville's got $80 million of cap space, and they probably want 4 offensive linemen this offseason. So that's a team right there that could outprice Buffalo pretty easily. But we all kind of know that he's not a $15 million per year guy. It's just it only takes one team to make him as such.
And I'm bringing up here the 2021 cap total for the Bills. Just kind of give people a little visual here. With the final question that I have for you is, the franchise tag. And speaking of the Bills specifically, I think naturally, fans kind of go to, okay, if you're too worried about a long-term deal, just franchise them and deal with them down the road. From my perspective, and that's why I want to ask you, that doesn't seem to make a lot of sense in a cash-strapped year to franchise tag Milano, who will probably cost you around 13, 14 million to do that. Is there a franchise taggable player on the Bills roster considering their situation?
I wouldn't think so. I mean, it depends on how important they think Daryl Williams is, because that tag is somewhat lower than it's been over the past 2 seasons because of the situation we're in. It's around 13.5, which is kind of the numbers we're all talking about out loud here on the open market. But Brandon Beane doesn't seem like the kind of guy that wants to throw that kind of cap hit on this table right now, even if it's for 2 weeks, even if it's just as a placeholder, because really what it's going to do is it's going to affect your ability to do anything March 17th outside of, 3-4 restructures to combat it. So Milano and Williams would be in the same boat, financially speaking, with that franchise tag. I think it's just easier to do the work internally, try to get them locked up before March 17th gets here. Milano's probably a long shot knowing what he's going to make somewhere else. And it's important to figure out Daryl Williams, because like I said, he's probably going to outprice himself the second he hits the market.
This was all awesome stuff. Thank you so much for taking the time tonight. Head over to Spotrac.com. Not only can you just check out all the financials, but there's great pieces up as well. A lot of projections for the free agents coming up. Anything else that you want to shout out or you want people to check out?
No, we do a weekly podcast, and there's some premium stuff to get rid of the ads on the site, things like that, all that fun stuff. Yeah, we're cranking over here. It's many sports at one time right now.
It's a beautiful thing, and you are definitely our top source for all salary cap knowledge. Mike Ginnetti, thank you so much, my friend.
This was fun, man. Thanks for having me.
Take care. All right. Wow, that was awesome. Mike's great, and I found his podcast the last couple weeks as I've been doing a lot of research for free agency, and it's just fun to hear him kind of go back and forth on a lot of this stuff, because even for us that are in the business, Ryan, it's something that's it's overwhelming. I mean, I kind of avoided business classes in college like the plague. I am a creative dude. I like writing. I like doing this kind of stuff. When it comes to math and business, I mean, it's not really my vibe. But I've learned a lot from folks. We'll talk to another guy in a minute that I've learned a lot from as well. And it's just nice to kind of get those guys and those gals in here and just learn something.
Yeah, I agree completely. It's funny you mentioned that. I actually started as a business major in college, and I think it was about a half a semester I said, oh, no, this is not for me. I always loved math, but I did not like that kind of math. So I agree. It's great to hear this stuff. And it's really interesting because sometimes you do look at a number that's linked with the play, and you're like, oh, really? They're going to make that kind of money? But what Mike said is true. There's going to be people bidding for these players. So someone that you think is worth $8 million might get $12 million on the market or $13 million, because there's going to be a team desperate for a number one wide receiver or someone they perceive to be that way. So it is really interesting to look at, and I'm definitely glad there are experts out there that can help us with this stuff.
We'll waste no more time. We will get to our next guest here. My man, look at that quaff. Look at that smile. Look at that beard. Mr. Greg Tompsett, Cover One, is in the house. What's up, man?
What's going on, guys? I can't come on with you and not be fully prepared. I got to be ready. No, I appreciate you guys having the master on. Mike's fantastic. I've had him on several times. He's going to give you all the details, and now I'm here to recklessly speculate.
I have to strongly disagree with you there, my friend, because you guys have such a cool story. I mean, I love everything that you guys do over at Cover One, and I'm going to have Aaron on here eventually as well. We've shared a lot of DMs in the last couple weeks. Or months since he's been back on Twitter. And you guys do a great job. I love the salary cap stuff though, because when you find something that you're really good at and you really understand and you're so open with your time to share that knowledge, that's the coolest thing. And I want to shout you out right at the top. If you tweet at Greg or you have a question, always answering them. I mean, all hours of the day and sometimes night as we get closer to free agency. Kudos, man. It's great. It's great stuff.
No, I appreciate it, man. We've tried to find our niche in taking the complicated parts of football and make them digestible for the average fan. So Eric does that more on the film side of it and helping with coverage schemes and understanding those things. I've found that I don't mind reading the CBA. I spend a lot of my professional time reading legalese and going through those kind of documents, and those fun classes that you guys fell asleep in during college. I enjoyed those. So going through the business elements of it and taking that financial analysis and legal contract evaluation that I have to do on a day-to-day basis, and now applying it to my passion, it's turned into a fun little world for me to be able to help with. And now this time of year is really my time of year for that stuff.
So let's not waste too much time, because you got your own show to do tonight. That's another thing. Dude's coming on here to do a hit right before his own show tonight. I appreciate it. So we won't waste any time. I want to start with Watt, because it's been something that's kind of overtaken the conversation. And I think one of the fun things that we could do here is maybe throw a couple guys at you, hypotheticals, and what happens if, because all the attention's on JJ Watt, right? But Mike just mentioned, like, we could be looking at a $60 million contract here over multiple years. I don't think that that's possible necessarily in Buffalo, but whatever the final number is, I don't think it's going to necessarily be cheap. So I guess paint a picture for what life after signing JJ Watt might look like as we move towards free agency.
Yeah, it's really interesting. You see these finalists that are in there. I think that they've leaked some information that makes sense. They talk about quarterback matters. They talk about the rest of the scheme matters. He wants to win a Super Bowl. I think there's kind of like a velvet rope, like the VIP room. And to get in, you have to be talking 8 digits or above. So I think even to get in the room, you have to be at $10 million or above. Now, once you get into the room, I then kind of believe that money is not the deciding factor, and that once you're in the room and you're in the discussion, I don't think that he's going to pick a slightly lower tier team because they offer 14 million because a better team's offering 10 million. I think that he's going to have a cutoff of where he assumes it needs to be and then get in there. And I think that the Bills are in the bottom of that tier, but they can get into that tier. And I think Mike described it really well earlier. I think he's the exact kind of guy you would describe of, hey, we keep Mario Addison around, but if we get JJ Watt, you replace him there. That's basically like a $6 million coupon on that signing. And all of a sudden now you only have to create $4 or $5 million in additional cap space. If he were to want to sign a multi-year deal, that really opens up options where you could reduce the first year, give him a big check over the entire 2, 3, 4 years, and then be able to stretch that out into future years. So it depends on what he's looking for there, but I certainly think the Bills can be in there as long as money isn't the deciding factor. It's just an entry point. I think they can get in just at the bottom of that range he's looking for.
So today I put out a piece, and someone in here said, I love the suggestion on Diggs, and that was actually Greg's idea. I watched the salary cap special, and that's where it came from. I even linked to it, though. I wasn't trying to take credit for it. But someone in the comments...
Yes, you were, Ryan. You're always stealing everybody's credit.
He was very good. Believe me, lots of people brought it up to me when it was linked to it. It was very cool. I appreciate it.
Yeah. What's funny is, a lot of time, Ryan is one of the most cordial credit givers that I think in our market, because we cross read a lot of each other's stuff, and most of the time I'm like, I don't think you got to credit that, man. I think that's just kind of general knowledge, and he's like, nope, that I'm crediting it, because if somebody says something, he wants them to get credit for it. So I like that.
No, honestly, I respect that so much. I always tell people, crediting people, like, if people are seeing it and you're crediting it, they're still seeing what you're producing. Like, they're still seeing your content, and that goes around so much more that people are willing to work with people like that. So I think that's fantastic.
Well, right, and then if someone would have asked me about it anyways, I would have been like, yeah, I have no idea how they could make that $9 million. So if someone would have called my bluff, too, it wouldn't have worked out. But what I was getting at is someone on Facebook said, well, if they sign J.J. Watt, they can't get a Jonnu Smith or a key player at this other position. Can you break down how it still would be possible to get an impact player at tight end or another key position for this team?
So first, let me start by saying there's a much higher probability that person on Facebook ends up being right, and they're going to look like they were right in hindsight. However, if I go through, and I play on Mike's site on Spotrac all the time. I play with our friends over at overthecap.com, and I use their tools way more than any grown adult should. It's an obsession on many times. If I maximize every single option that the Bills have available and lean into every possible restructure, every reasonable pay cut, within reason, keeping a guy. And I'm not a big fan of releasing people. I love the way that Mike talked about that. You don't create holes preemptively to then have to go fill them. You deal with that on a case-by-case basis. I only lean into like Vernon Butler, Lee Smith, a handful of real obvious ones. I can create over $50 million in cap space with very real, like every single one individually in a vacuum being completely realistic. Like each of them could happen on their own. I think when I did it earlier today, it takes like 16 different transactions in order to do that. But 16 different instances of Stephon Diggs giving him a 2-year, $40 million well-deserved extension, but reducing the cap hit this year, kicking some of the new money from Trey White and Deion Dawkins into the future, but reducing their cap hit for this year. Not releasing Mitch Morris or John Brown, but reducing their cap hit for this year. Each of those kind of pieces. So any of those things are all, if I'm smart enough to find those, Brandon Beane and his team are a lot smarter than I am. They know that stuff much better than I do. They know those options as well. I would say each of those are cards to play in their hand. They're not going to do like what I did, like in a Madden style setup where I just do all those moves and then, oh, look at all the money I have to go to spend. Let's go blow it all. One-on-one, as they need them, they're like, all right, we can play this card now. We think we can get a deal for Watt. All right, that probably means Addison. We were going to do Butler anyways. Let's go ahead and do those. And honestly, some of the things like Morse, or those are more natural that you need to do to create room to sign your draft picks. A handful of those, maybe 4 or 5 of those 14 moves, are likely to happen no matter what. So those we might see ahead of time, but the other ones are just there ready to play if they need them, and they can create as much space as they want realistically. But when I say $50 million, that's not found money. That means I'm borrowing from 2022, 2023, 2024, 2025, and a big chunk of that next year. So all of a sudden you're reducing those future cap hits, and just like he's experiencing now that, oh, that's not what I budgeted for, we're in a little bit of trouble. They're not going to kick all of that can down the road. So they're not going to even near create that. I do think 20 million is probably in the realistic range.
Okay. I also wanted to ask you about a cornerback too, because I put up a post today. Brandon Beane did almost an hour with Chris Collinsworth and Richard Sherman, and I definitely recommend. Yeah, I definitely recommend going and listening to it if you're a Bills fan, because it's just good hearing the general manager just talk for that long, kind of off the cuff, and that's a different environment too. Like when he's talking to us, it's very rhythmic. And I will say this: like Brandon's really good with the media. I feel like most of our Zoom conferences, he's very forthcoming, and I know why Sean has to be a different kind of way, being the kind of voice of the organization and the day-to-day kind of as much as we talk to him. But Brandon's usually a little bit more, easygoing. So I definitely recommend going and listening to it. But I think that, one of the things that I went into this offseason thinking about is that cornerback 2 spot and how many options there are in free agency, from veterans like Richard Sherman to kind of some more maybe affordable options, or I think you guys talked about a few of them on your podcast. Jason Verrett, who's from the same scheme, kind of similar kind of players. What does that all look like in terms of if they were to attack cornerback 2? What does that mean for the rest of free agency and a potential Watt deal or a potential Jonnu Smith deal?
So any one of those, I think the Bills have a 8-digit move in them. So now whether that's Daryl Williams' market gets up there to 10 million, or they find it, we'll talk about it here maybe in a bit. I think that the way Mike described the tackle market, where it could sadly mean that Daryl Williams is the number 1 tackle available if Moton gets, tagged, or how people feel about Cam Robinson or some others like that. There's a bit more in the linebacker market with Levante David and other people like that maybe he comes back and realizes, oh, I'm not going to get the deal I thought. I'll come back on a 1-year, $10 million deal. I think the Bills have one of those in them realistically. Now, if all of a sudden Williams gets down to $8 million and Jonnu Smith is $8 million and they really want to make it work, they can do some of those kind of things. I will be surprised if cornerback is that price range. Eric and I did a show over the weekend. We really tried to lean into the value side of names that are out there. Guys like Akella Witherspoon is a guy who's actually the same build. If you go on the mock draftable web thing that they'd line up different things of your size, arm length, height, weight, sporty speed, everything in the combine. His number one comparable is Richard Sherman. Except he ran a 4.4 in the combine, and Sherman was, obviously famously slower and then played phenomenal. He played in San Francisco, a lot of potential, 6'2", 6'3", long arms, a guy that could be really advantageous to bring in on a 2-year, $4 million deal when you already have, Levi Wallace, a pretty likely returnee on the restricted free agent tag. You obviously heard the way that Brandon talked about Dane Jackson in the pod, who's the first name that they brought up, with that sneaky guy that might be hidden. He was tempered it not to be superstar, but when he asked him, hey, who's this sneaky guy nobody else knows about, that's the name he went to. So obviously it shows you a little bit what they think of. That to me means, I think we hear a lot about Richard Sherman. People throw out Xavier Rhodes. People throw out some names like that. Sure, that would be lovely. I think they're going to be more in that range of maybe a kind of injury recovery guy like Jason Verrett and Akella Witherspoon. Sidney Jones is another name people remember from the draft a couple years ago. I think they're going to go more in that range of a guy who can compete with Levi Wallace and along with Dane Jackson. And honestly, now Levi Wallace, at his 4th year, he kind of is the veteran for that competition. And that, if they don't think they're going to extend him beyond the RFA tender this year, maybe we see that or maybe a mid-round pick.
We have a question from Steve Lynn. So if the NFL adds one more game to the regular season, how is the cap affected with or without fans and a new TV deal?
Awesome question, Steve. So there's a couple different pieces there. The new TV deal is by far the biggest piece. That's, you're talking about astronomical money. I think most people have seen the articles that are out there. The NFL is asking for double the payment that they got before. They're asking every single network to pay 100% more. And I think the one that I saw,
sound business strategy.
Oh, it's great. It's absolutely phenomenal negotiated. I would like you to pay double next time.
I didn't need to go to school for that, Greg. I did not need to go to school for that.
And honestly, the NFL has the most valuable entity in live television, so they're trying to leverage that. So that's going to be a huge part of it. That's why they're comfortable raising the floor. You heard them go from 175 to 180. I've now heard it might be closer to 183, 182 is probably where it's going to end up. That's because of that TV money. Now, that's also a piece with the reason they're asking for more TV money is the additional playoff game that they added going to the 7 wildcard spots. And now this everybody remembers this past year, that wildcard weekend was phenomenal. Going 3 straight games, that whole weekend was fantastic. That's more money, and the 17th game is more money, but in the CBA, it was negotiated at a max of 20 games. So it's taking away a preseason game. A preseason game is obviously more valuable than a regular season game, but it mitigates it a little bit in that they were going to make some gate from the preseason game, especially because so many teams are, 60-70% season ticket holders, that you're getting that money anyway. So it's probably not as big of a factor in the direct cash from the 17th game as it is a leverage point with the TV deal and why they're going to get so much money there.
Interesting. Let's shift gears here a little bit and kind of paint a picture, if you will, for how free agency will go from a Bills perspective, because you look back in 2019 and it was fast and furious. I mean, deals were being handed out, and rightfully so. I mean, they did the work on the cap to be in that position. Last year was a little bit slower. Obviously, by the end of Monday night, we got the Stephon Diggs deal, and that kind of dominated the week. How do you anticipate this going? I mean, is it all dependent on a potential J.J. Watt deal beforehand? Maybe even, guys that aren't even on the street yet that we could be throwing into this mix. I know, a lot of fans are excited about potentially Von Miller hitting free agency and him being in the mix. I'm not so sure about that, but that's kind of a separate conversation. How do you feel like this thing is going to play out? Is going to be, again, some moves early on, or something where they kind of sit back and wait?
So I think you're spot on the comment you made about other guys who aren't out there yet. Eric and I talked about that on Saturday, is that I think we touched on half of the guys that are out there because there's so many teams about to make moves that we just don't know who they're going to be. If you tell me that, we went through some one tech guys and you tell me the Bears are struggling and need to release Hakeem Hicks, he might jump towards the top of my list. He's one of the largest humans on earth. There are some different pieces like that some of those teams that are struggling that aren't going to be able to make those things fit, all of a sudden they cut loose a few people that we weren't expecting. That could change things. I think if Brandon Beane has his choice and we face the reality that, okay, we can't bring back Daryl Williams or Matt Milano, one of those is going to be the focus of the first round pick, and the other one will do a combination of a veteran and a day 2 pick. And that means we need to go out and sign somebody. The temptation to only dabble in the released market where you take advantage of that comp pick bingo, where we're not signing an unrestricted free agent like a J.J. Watt, like, at other guys, Josh Norman last year, although it obviously didn't work out in that manner. That was the idea behind it. The pursuit of Christian Kirksey last year and now him being released again. All of a sudden, you sign J.J. Watt, you sign Rick Wagner, who got released as well from the Packers. You sign a released Christian Kirksey, and then you draft a tackle and a linebacker. You just added 3 players. None of them count against the compensatory pick formula. You let Matt Milano walk for $14 million, and you let Daryl Williams walk for $12 million. Well, now you just got a 3rd round pick and a 4th round pick, and you replace the players with lesser money. I think if Brandon Beane has a choice, that's what he would prefer. I don't think he's going to be so restricted that he won't go into the unrestricted market. If the best player they want and the best fit and the best value is an unrestricted free agent, I think they'll do it. But I would caution fans not to be sitting there refreshing Twitter every 5 minutes on, Monday, March 15th. I don't think it's going to be that kind of day. I do think that J.J. Watt is a legitimate, real possibility. We're going to know that before March 15th. We're going to know that maybe next week. I think that we'll see some of the other moves that happen there. I don't expect it to be hot and heavy. That compensatory pick formula also has a limitation on the back end, usually 2 weeks after the draft. The last couple of years, it's been May 15th. There's going to be a cutoff there. I think we're going to see the most 1-year veteran minimum contracts we've seen in NFL history this year, and I think a ton of them are going to be signed like May 16th, the day after that compensatory pick formula. So I think that's a date to watch for as well, that a bunch of teams are going to hold off there. Players are going to be out there waiting. I don't want to sign for a cheap deal, but if I am going to sign for a cheap deal, I want it to be catching balls from Josh Allen in this offense, that kind of thing.
We got some fan questions that I want to get to still, but I want to kind of break off for a second and talk about something that's super important and goes right along with what we've been talking about here, and it's that Super Bowl window. And I wonder if you're sitting there and you're Brandon Beane, how urgent does this next 2 months feel to you, and how open, number one, how open is that window? And I have obviously some thoughts on it, but I want to get yours, Greg. And also, are there, in the situation that you're in now, are there moves that improve your championship window, if you will, whether it be adding J.J. Watt but having to lose a Daryl Williams? Is there a specific, because if you bring back Daryl Williams, in a lot of ways you're the same team that you were last year. But it's an important piece at the same time. There's all this juggling that goes on. It's not really an envious situation other than the fact that you'd be an NFL general manager.
So I think it's important to realize the Bills are all in. The Bills are in a Super Bowl window regardless of what they do here. I don't think that there's any move that all of a sudden makes, now they're a Super Bowl contender. And honestly, if they don't make any marquee moves, they're still a Super Bowl contender. The Bills are still coming back with Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs and Cole Beasley and all of those weapons. Are still coming back with Trey White and all the pieces that are there on defense. That they're going to do some things. They're going to fill each of those spots. They're going to have a competitive, strong roster. I think they could make one nice move here. I don't think any of the moves they're going to make are going to be so so monumental that they shift the dynamic of, now the Bills are the number one contender for the Super Bowl no matter what. I don't think that move exists. I think the Bills are going to be one of the top 5 teams in the NFL next year whether they make a handful of the moves people are predicting or virtually none of them. So I think that it's important for fans to realize the Bills have a really good GM and a really good head coach and a franchise quarterback. We have a Super Bowl window for 10 years now. Every single year, we're all in. Every single year, we're doing everything we can to win, just like the Packers have been and the Seahawks have been. And just like the Packers and Seahawks, there's going to be some awesome years and maybe some iffy years where people get hurt and things aren't awesome. That's the kind of team we are now. So I'm not one that says, hey, we have to go all in no matter what, everything right now, because once Josh Johns' extension, it's all over. Well, no, it just shifts a little bit. Some things go differently. We lean on our draft picks more. If anything, the differential of making that leap, no free agent we sign will be as important as Ed Oliver playing like a top 10 pick. No player we sign will be as important as Tremaine Edmonds taking a huge leap forward. Those are the things that we need to see. And then I hope we add some window dressing on there on top.
So we've talked a lot about Matt Milano, Daryl Williams being two guys that might price themselves out of the market. Are there any other Bills free agents that you could see making more money than some fans may expect in free agency and maybe bid, not be able to come back to Buffalo based on other offers they're receiving?
The market value that Mike set for John Feliciano sounds like too much money to me. So if somebody offers him $8 million a year, God bless him. Go get that money, Mongo. I hope to have him back at a much more reasonable number, but that was higher than I anticipated when I started doing my math. I'd say the one that maybe some fans take for granted, I could see maybe a sneaky offer for Isaiah McKenzie.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I like Isaiah McKenzie. I'd love to have him back pretty reasonably. I'm starting to shift that maybe he showed the potential in the return game that he could do his role and replace Andre Roberts.
What's a he's gone number? 2 for 8. Can you sign him to that?
I think that's about the cutoff. I want him back at 2, maybe 3 million. If you start to get above there, I don't think we have the role to let him hit that value. Mm-hmm. He would be signing with a team that wants to give him Cole Beasley's role, and we don't have that role in our offense to give him. So I could see a team wanting to give him that money because they see that potential in him. We can't pay him that because we don't want to lose him when we can't give him those targets. We can't give him that opportunity. We just don't have that spot for him. That's his next step. If he's going to go into more than a gadget guy in the NFL, it's being Cole Beasley.
His agent has so much ammo in NFL in meetings with general managers because, listen, the guy literally has spent the last 2 years at in Cole Beasley College learning how to be that dominant slot guy. It's like watching them in practice, more so in 19 than 20. He kind of really developed into his own player, but he was attached at the hip with Cole Beasley, and you saw, to your point, he flashed in the return game. I know that there's been questions about the fumbles, but listen, when you can make big plays like that, there's really good return guys that have had fumbles throughout history, and if you can make the big play, I think you can kind of stomach some of that. But I think that's a great point because we've been talking about McKenzie and the fact that that performance against a Miami defense that was shutting everybody down, and he looked electric out there, and that might be somebody you want to take a shot on. All right, let's get to a couple of these fan questions real quick. One of them here from our buddy, Banged Up Bills. With the salary cap going down because of lost revenue, will we see the cap eventually jump up to where it should be based on past growth percentages, or will it grow slower, leading to overall lost earnings for players?
So, yes, I actually think it's going to go back relatively quickly. The only caveats to that are I don't know that we jump back in week 1 of the 2021 season at 100% capacity in 100% of stadiums. So that's a little bit there that, we'll see how the next couple months go. Right now, I don't know that I would guess that every single stadium in every single state is 100% capacity in, September. Also, the reason that there is a floor for this year, and they talk about they went from 175 to 180, is not because that's how much money they made. If they went for the true, hey, we're just taking the amount of money, the 50%, 49% the players get divided by 32, the cap might be like 150, and they literally would have had to fold franchises. So the way that they did that, the new agreement they made last summer, was they're borrowing forward equally split elements of the next 4 years cap. So depending on where that falls, for super easy math, let's say that it ends up at 182 and the real number was 162 and they had to borrow $20 million per team. That means each cap for the next 5 years, if next year is 215, they're going to make it 210 because you got to pay back that extra $5 million. So those are two factors of why it might not be exactly as high as they project. But if you go back and you just simply remove 2020 as the weird year that it was, the cap was on a projection of going from 200 to roughly 210 or 215, then 225 to 227, then 240, then like 260 the next handful of years. I don't know that it immediately skips that 210 to 215 year and goes directly in at 227, but I won't be shocked if the 2022 cap is $220 and they give back the $5 and it goes to 215. I think that's very much in play. And then I think the future projections from there are right back in line. Those are very, they know how many people are buying tickets to NFL games and know how many people watch on TV. That's not changing that dramatically in the near future. They're going to be making that money that they plan. So I expect that to be back to what they expected. They'll never catch up for or make up for the money that was lost. There are guys, Matt Milanos of the world, who are hitting free agency this year in the worst possible moment in history, and that's never going to be made up. That's just reality.
Okay, Greg, I hope you're ready for this one. We have a punter question.
Woohoo!
And
Yes.
I punted it to Ryan because I don't. I can't say it. I don't want to get.
You don't want another Puntapalooza, Corey versus Corey?
Yeah, I don't want to get anybody mad at me. Go ahead, Ryan.
All right. Last year, most of the Bills Mafia was screaming for a new punter, but after a great season from Corey Bajorquez, can the Bills afford to re-sign him, or should we look for a new punter?
So, that's a very fair question. I've heard several other people ask it. Corey Bajorquez is a restricted free agent, so there's a limitation and they'll use that in negotiations more than I anticipate them applying the tender, because the tender is actually like $2.5 million to apply it. I don't know that I anticipate that, or at least 1.5 for the, hey, we can match any offer, but we receive no compensation. So for him, probably $1.5 million. So that at least caps what they could sign. Punters don't sign for that much money. Maybe the very, very best get like $3 and $4 million sometimes. I don't think 1 year of leading the NFL in gross average, pretty good in net, but still some challenges on touchbacks and some pieces like that. He had a nice season, I think, is a reason why they want to re-sign him. I don't think his agent has a ton of ammo to say, I want top 5 punter money in the NFL. So I very much think they can bring him back. I think he's earned the right to come back and makes sense to be retained. But I think that you're looking at like a Reed Ferguson kind of deal where like, hey, we value you. We want you back on a 3-year deal, and we want you for a little bit more than the NFL minimum because we think you're worth a little bit more. But I'm anticipating like 3 years, $3.5 million for, a 1.2 million a year, just a notch above the veteran minimum kind of thing for him to come back. And if it's above that for some weird reason, you use the RFA tender for 1 year and then worry about it next year.
Greg Tomsett, cover1.com.net, right?
.net.
I caught myself. Good thing. Why don't you let everybody know what you guys got cooking? I know you got a big show tonight, so definitely mention that as well.
Cool. So we're sticking to the same idea, one show a week here, helping out some of the other guys as well. Tonight we are doing a fun show of the game that the kids play, the F, Marry, Kill. And F obviously means financially responsible contracts in a fully consensual manner. We're going to be going through and challenging each other with players still on the roster, the ones that everybody kicks around of, oh, we need to release him, we need to release him. Who would you restructure? Who would you extend? Who would you release? And we're going to go back and forth kind of haggling out those guys tonight. Then we'll do some of the same things, maybe some more value finds, trying to find some more diamonds in the rough here. And then, just like everybody else, we'll be reacting to the signings as we get in there. And then once we shift gears out of free agent mode, diving fully into draft mode, and I'll try to ramp up to maybe 10 or 15 mock drafts a day once I get into that mode.
I challenge you to find some suitable background music for when Aaron Quinn starts talking about Levi Wallace. That's really what I want to see on the show, is just like set the scene.
Hey.
I just want to feel. I want to feel the. No, I
slip into something comfortable. Pour yourself a drink.
Great stuff.
No, I appreciate it very
Greg,
much, guys. Always fun to jump on with you guys.
This is great stuff. Go check out Greg tonight. We got a little bit more for you though. Have a good night, man. All right, so Mr. Talbot, a lot to digest there over the last hour. Some great stuff. I just want to kind of hang out for a minute here, kind of go over a little bit of it, react to a little bit of the questions. There were, I think, a couple more in the chat. We can get to it, but after talking to Mike and Greg, I mean, where are you sitting here? Has anything shifted in terms of your expectation? I want you to talk a little bit about your story that you put out today. Ryan has done this Beane article the last couple of years, and today he put out this year's version and kind of roadmapped. We talked about at the top of the podcast. I'm going on a road trip this weekend. You roadmapped the Bills offseason. Talk about that, and maybe has anything changed for you since hearing tonight's guests?
Well, I think Mike made a good point about approaching players for pay cuts. I guess it's one thing if the player comes to you and says, I don't want to be outright released, I'll accept this kind of salary. But I like what he said. So in that article, I had John Brown taking a pay cut. I had a few others taking pay cuts. So maybe the best thing the Bills can do is release John Brown and say, we want you back, but go test the market. Because as both guests said, or as they alluded to, this wide receiver class is loaded. Allen Robinson is going to make big money if he's not franchise tagged. I think Chris Godwin's going to make big money. And I know I'm going to miss some names because there's so many of them, but you even get to that second tier of players, Juju Smith-Schuster, Corey Davis. They're all projected to be in that $10 million range. So there's going to be a lot of guys getting big money out there. And a guy like John Brown on the other side of 30, coming off of a year where he dealt with injuries, maybe you do let him go and you can get him at even a more reduced rate than what I proposed, which was about 1 year, $5 million for a John Brown. I think that the Bills have to be fiscally smart about what they're doing because there's a huge extension on the horizon for Josh Allen. And I think that Brendan Beane is going to do everything in his power to get it done this year. Because, again, as Mike said, you're looking at a guy that went from do we pick up his fifth-year option to holy cow, he's going to be making $40 million in his new contract. If you wait another year and he builds off of last year and he's even better somehow, then you're talking 42, 43. So that number keeps going up if you don't deal with it now. And if the Bills can find a way to make that number work, I think he's going to get it done this year. What about you?
The culture part of this, which is the ultimate eye roller for a lot of fans, when you start talking about what it's like in the building and all the time spent stewing over the culture that's been built here. To me, it's almost like they set things up in a lot of ways to work with a lot of these young players that they gave a shot. I mean, listen to what Josh Allen says. When you ask him about this great season that he had, he said, I want to come out and prove for the guys that drafted me and believed in me that they didn't make a mistake by drafting me. That tells me, along with everything else, the leadership, the bonds in the building, and especially with Brandon Beane, that I don't think it gets nearly enough, airtime. There's a closeness between Beane and Allen. And I think that everybody involved here at the top of the program, from Sean and Brandon and Josh and some of the other pieces, Tre'Davious, they're kind of linked in a lot of ways. And Tre'Davious White, when that deal was made, a lot of people talked about that there was a little bit of a hometown discount, if you will. I mean, we saw a couple weeks later, and I know Jalen Ramsey is probably the number one cover corner in the NFL. He plays in a different scheme with a lot more, I don't want to say responsibility, but he's out on an island a lot more in a different situation. But there was an element to that. So I think that at the end of the day, Josh is going to want to get paid, and he's going to want a respectful number. But you can't convince me that there won't be some type of back and forth in that process to set up the franchise to be successful. That's another piece of this. I mean, look what Tom Brady did for years and years and years in Tampa Bay to kind of support what the team and franchise was trying to do to build around him. I think Josh is someone that I know Bills fans don't love, that he's Brady was his idol, but I think he took some notes on that. And I think you'll even see that moving forward with Brady and Tampa Bay as they try to keep that whole thing going together. I think that there's a way to do it that you keep him happy, but he also doesn't make you absolutely destroy things. And I do agree with Greg. I heard him say this on his show. Once you get up into that stratosphere, what's the difference between 38 million and 42 at the end of the day? I mean, a couple million here or there, it's probably not going to be the difference between the ability to go out and sign a top tier free agent or not. I think that you're going to have to really become good at the Tampa Bay model. I think that, and that's another thing. I wish we would have had a chance to talk to Mike about this, or Greg, about the idea of super teams. And Brandon was asked about that today on the podcast and how that's going to potentially play out. And you almost get the idea that Richard Sherman's kind of been sitting around with a lot of his buddies around the league talking about the fact that, hey, maybe this is a year that I take a little bit less on a 1-year deal to go into a situation that's absolutely perfect for me. And then you all of a sudden see 3 or 4 or 5 teams that are just absolutely loaded. And, if I will say, I think somebody joked about this, Sherman looked very impressed with not only the Bills, but Brandon Beane on that podcast today.
Oh, he was. Yeah, I thought he was blown away with Brandon Beane. I thought he came away really impressed. But you raised some great points. When Tom Brady was with the Patriots, every single year he would move some money around, so that way the team could go out and add pieces around him. Now, let it be known, he still made all that money. He just kind of moved it. It was moved around in different ways, bonuses and pushed down the line a little bit here and there. So he still earned every penny of it. He was just smart about how he accepted it. But you mentioned it. Tre'Davious White, when he signed, he left some money on the table, and it took about a week before he was no longer the highest paid cornerback in the league. Deion Dawkins probably left some money on the table compared to, not that he would have wanted to test the market eventually, but if he would have gone out to the market, he could have made more out there somewhere else. So there's a loyalty. We've rebuilt this program, not just Brendan Beane and Sean McDermott, but these players. A lot of them don't know the losing that came before them. They just know that they're that group that has turned the culture around, that has turned this franchise around, and they want to see it through. So whether you're talking Josh Allen, whether you're talking even about a Matt Milano, who, if his market isn't out there in free agency, I would not be shocked if he came back on a 1-year deal. I would rather see it through, take a little bit less in 2021, and then try to cash in somewhere when the salary cap goes up, when there's more teams that are bidding for my services. So it is a really interesting argument. The super team thing intrigues me because, the Bills need a few pieces here and there. And if they can get some veterans, maybe you miss out on a J.J. Watt, but maybe you get some other guy, a defensive end. And if you let go of John Brown, I just talked about how this wide receiver class is so deep. There's going to be 1 or 2 guys that don't get that expected salary that they're projected at. The 12 million, the 14 million, the 10 million. And the longer they sit out there, the longer they might say, would it be the worst thing in the world if I took a $6 or $7 million deal from the Bills and caught passes from Josh Allen and one of the most pass-happy offenses in the league? I don't think so. So there's a lot to unfold here. There's a lot to keep an eye on in these next few weeks leading up to free agency in terms of teams releasing players that could be fits for Buffalo. So this is going to be a pretty exciting year for free agency.
We were talking about the Super Bowl window, and Greg kind of took me back a little bit by saying it's a 10-year window. I don't know if I'm there with them. Things have changed in this league so dramatically from year to year, and I'm pretty sure that Philadelphia Eagles, when they won a Super Bowl with their backup quarterback, with their MVP caliber, quarterback at the time, out in that game, they probably thought their window was wide open. And things change in this league quite a bit. I think about what to me could be the move that is the biggest setback for the Bills moving into 2021. And for me, I think I've landed on Daryl Williams because, and I know this isn't new, we've been talking about this for weeks, but it's because of the uncertainty that would follow that move. Like, you could probably go out there and get a mid-tier tackle and hope for the best. I mean, nobody anticipated Daryl Williams coming in here and playing at the level that he did. There was kind of a glimmer of hope based on what he did in Carolina. And we talked to some folks in Carolina who were very bullish on Daryl Williams at least playing to a level that would be above average of an NFL starter. But if you take him out of the mix, we were talking about this today, listening to Brandon Beane's comments on Cody Ford, and you heard him talk at the end of the season about, and we'll bring up what he said in a minute, but at the end of the season, he was asked about Cody Ford, and he brought up the injuries and how unfair it's been to a young player that's been moving all around that just hasn't really been healthy. He had to have surgery after his rookie season. He had to have surgery that ended his second season. He just hasn't really been healthy. So I think the full picture will kind of come into focus for Cody in year 3. And we talked about this with Marcel and Nate last week, but asked about it today, he kind of made it seem to me like it's like, yeah, Cody's in the mix. And for a second round pick that you seem to have really high hopes for, you almost want to hear more than that. So if Daryl Williams is out of the picture and you look just at what's on the roster right now and maybe even add in, even at 30, a tackle, that's a crapshoot too. I mean, there could be a situation where you draft a tackle at 30, you get into camp, you get into preseason, and that player is not ready, and you have to kind of pivot and maybe go back to Cody Ford, who I would imagine if you go that route anyway, he's still going to be getting tackle reps because you know how much they like the versatility and getting multiple looks. So there's so much uncertainty created around Josh Allen if Daryl Williams isn't back, unless you have as close to foolproof plan as you can develop in this kind of economy, if you will.
Yeah, well, that's just the thing, though. You said it, there is no foolproof plan, because if Daryl Williams doesn't come back, it's a roll of the dice. And you mentioned number 30. Wasn't that where Tennessee picked Isaiah Wilson last year? It was around that point, and Isaiah Wilson had some red flags. Don't get me wrong. Tennessee knew that going in, but he tweeted and then deleted that he was done with Tennessee after 1 year. He was pretty, you don't want to call someone a bust after 1 year, but he did not come close to delivering what they probably thought they were getting out of him. So, yeah, I mean, Brendan Beane's pretty good about who he drafts in terms of character in that regard. But there's no guarantee that a rookie at number 30, even if it's the number 2, number 3 right tackle in this draft class, that they can come in day one and contribute. And some comments on my article today were, oh boy, there's some risky moves. There's going to be some risky moves every year. And I get offensive line is probably the last place you want to take a risky move because you want to protect Josh Allen. But if you can't afford a Daryl Williams, you have to look at some of these Mike Remmers types, which isn't going to excite a lot of people, but he played in Carolina. He did a pretty good job in Kansas City. Rick Wagner. Yeah, until the
poor guy. But I mean, all of them really struggled.
Yeah, all of them. A guy like Rick Wagner, who the Bills apparently had interest in 2017, Jared Veldier. There are veterans out there that you can get very cheap as a placeholder. There's better guys in this too, in terms of that middle tier. But there's no sure thing unless you're going to go out and spend top dollar. And even then, some of those players flop when you go out and you spend all that money in free agency. But Brendan Beane has his work cut out for him this year, I guess is what I'm trying to say, because whether it's linebacker and replacing a Matt Milano, whether it's offensive tackle, whether it's wide receiver number 2, if they part ways with John Brown, he has to work his magic, so to speak, to address those spots. Whether it's, okay, I think Gabriel Davis could be wide receiver 2, but we still need to have that speed option. Can we trust a John Ross, someone who's never been healthy, to be able to be that speed guy, or Kenny Stills, who was in our system for a few weeks on the practice squad? Is that someone that we can depend on, even though he has a history of hamstring, lower body injuries, things like that? It's not an easy position to be in if you're Brendan Beane, but if there's someone that's proven time and time again that he can hit on these free agents, that he can find some gems in the draft, especially later in the draft, he's the guy that can do it.
We found a gem for the Shout Buffalo Bills football podcast, and his name is Ryan Talbot, and he wrote a great off-season plan for the Buffalo Bills. Make sure you go over to NewYorkUpstateSyracuse.com and check it out. It is called Playing Bills GM, laying out the full plan for free agency and the draft. I checked it out earlier today, and it is awesome. Give you a good kind of framework to work with as we move towards free agency. Speaking of which, I put out 50 free agent targets for the Bills, kind of dove into that a little bit. Try to give you guys a look at some of the options out there. Probably missed a couple. I know somebody mentioned, why isn't Darren Lee in there? Curtis Samuel. Samuel for me was maybe a little bit too pricey at a position where they're probably looking to shed salary. And so I know that there's interest there. I know that, from things I heard last year in Indianapolis, that the Bills, for obvious reasons, Carolina, they were in Carolina for the joint practices. They like Curtis Samuel, no doubt about it. But wow, we have a question here. Any quick Sabres thoughts in closing? Just real quick.
I'm glad they won yesterday. That was a nice change of pace. I don't know what to make of this team. I don't understand Jeff Skinner being, a healthy scratch. I'm not saying the guy is God's gift to hockey, but where you're playing him, how you're playing him is not suited to his strengths. Put him with Eichel. Put him on that line. See what he can do. Shoot some pucks at the net. Maybe he can win some more games. I don't know. I'm kind of losing hope here on the Sabres. It's just been a downhill spiral, or downward spiral, I should say, for the last couple of years, and it doesn't seem to be getting any better.
You're not going to get many Sabres thoughts from me. I have not watched a minute of Sabres action this year. I'm more of an NBA guy. Sorry, don't shoot me. But I know Buffalo is a very big hockey town. It's just never been my cup. But from the outside looking in, I sense all of this negative energy around all of it. And I understand, because there's this looming fear that Jack Eichel is just going to bounce, and everybody's, after you tank basically to get a guy like that, to think that it's over with absolutely nothing to show for it. I get it. And, Ralph Kruger, for all intents and purposes, hasn't worked out. And I know that there's frustration there, but it's a weird year. It's a weird, COVID year too. They have a major new piece in Taylor Hall, who I guess, from what I've read, has not been what they probably were hoping for. So, there's a lot of moving pieces over there, and hockey's tough, man. It's a game I don't really understand. Any sport to me, any team sport to me, where an 8 seed can win the championship, that just is weird to me. Didn't that happen a couple of years where an 8 seed, I don't know if it was the Ducks or somebody, went on this unbelievable run? It's like, wait, so you were terrible all year, and then you just got into the tournament and you somehow won a couple 7-game series in a row? I don't know. I don't like talking about this too much, because I don't want Bills fans to get upset that are also Sabres fans. It's just, I've just never gravitated to the sport.
No, that's fair. And, even Las Vegas in their first year, they made a really deep run in the playoffs. Right. It's like, how does that happen when you look at the history of the NFL and those teams, when they come in for the first year, that they're picking the bargain guys off of rosters, and they're usually pretty terrible. So it's definitely one of those things where it doesn't make much sense. I agree with that. Let's do a few rapid fire here, Matt. Here's a question from Mary coming up here. What about Bud Dupree? Too expensive?
I got to tell you, I like when you take over, man. That was great. You just went in there, you fling it. Usually I produce the show, but Ryan has been evolving here, and that was one. I'll sit back. Let's do some rapid fire.
All right, Bud Dupree, is he too expensive for the Bills? That's where I land on it. What do you think? It's
a little bit of that, and it's a great question, Mary, because I didn't put him in my my 50 free agents either, and he is a good pass rusher. So I think that it always makes sense in that scenario, but he's part of a little bit of a different defense. I mean, he was a coverage linebacker that kind of morphed into a edge pass rusher, right? And those guys are kind of a little bit hit or miss. Hassan Reddick is another guy who had 12 and a half sacks, who kind of I put on there because I think the price might be a little bit more reasonable, but I always wonder how those guys will transition to a Bills defense that is very traditional, 4 defensive linemen, hands in the dirt. You never see really a ton, even Jerry Hughes, standing up. I mean, he's most of the time coming out of the 3-point stance. So I always get a little bit funny with that, but listen, they need to address the pass rush. And if they think that a guy like Bud Dupree is it's doable, I definitely think it should be considered.
Some confusion about the John Clayton report from earlier that was shared by Andrew Filipponi. Is it true that J.J. Watt narrowed it down to the Titans, Packers, and Bills?
Andrew Filipponi, Mr. Mason, the president of the Mason Rudolph fan club, who came out last year and said that Mason Rudolph is going to be better than Baker Mayfield, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson. Listen. This is just a PSA, a little bit, nothing against Andrew Filipponi, but just let's listen to let's pay attention to who we're getting our news from. Let's just dial it back, because that literally created an absolute storm today, where to the point where some of the national just aggregators started putting out like social media cards of final three, Packers, Titans, and Bills, and then John Clayton comes out and is like, oh, this has all been misinterpreted, and it's like, okay, so now all day long you're going to have people in your mentions like, wow, so the Bills are one of the final three. No, like Mike said, they're one of the final 12. It seems like he's still considering. Probably not, that list is probably not that long at this point, but it's not true. And I would, the Raiders are involved there. I mean, start talking about places to live. I lived in Las Vegas for 5 years. It would be a very cool thing to go pair up with John Gruden, obviously the big personality there. So I'm sure JJ Watt is considering that. But no, I mean, Pittsburgh may be out, and I think that they were out from the beginning, even though JJ Watt or TJ Watt did the Just Bring It, the Rock gif, which was phenomenal. Listen, I'm always going to applaud a Rock gif. So that was great.
Yeah. John Clayton pretty much said that it was misinterpreted, that those are the three teams that are quote unquote in the lead. It's kind of like when you're in middle school and you like a bunch of people and you like some of them and you just like some others. JJ Watt really likes the Titans, the Packers, and the Bills, but someone else could come in and sway him before this is all said and done. For instance, someone that covers the Chiefs believes outright that the Chiefs are in on him as well, and they're kind of like staying hidden until the last minute. Will that happen? I don't know, but if the Chiefs are truly interested, for instance, why wouldn't JJ Watt consider them? So a team could swoop in last minute. There's no reason to think that right now a decision is imminent, that he's going to make a decision tonight, tomorrow. Obviously, before free agency hits, he would be very wise to, because once the floodgates open and there's more players out there, he could leave some money on the table.
Indeed. Is there another question that I just saw? A draft question?
I just saw office pool, and I'm not sure what that means.
I'll throw it in there. Let's see here.
I missed it. Must be.
Oh, here we go. Cam Greasy. I don't know many college player. Who's your dream player to fall to the Bills at number 50? And so I'm looking through here, and I think you first start off with positions, right? Like, I think that edge rusher is one that, you hope that if you're a Bills fan, that there would even be an edge rusher that was worthy of that pick at 30. And it's kind of a crapshoot, because you figure that the top, definitely the top one, which is Gregory Rousseau from edge rusher from Miami. He's ranked number 13 in Daniel Jeremiah's top 50. So yeah, I think that's probably the dream scenario, is something kind of pops up with him and he falls to 30. And when you're talking about a top 15 talent, I think Jeremiah has been really consistent the last 5 years. His tops, I mean, he was in on Josh Jacobs. It's what really popped out. Remember when he put out his first top 50, nobody was talking about Josh Jacobs, and he put him at number 5 in his top 50. And everybody was like, what? This is craziness. And ever since then, I listen to his podcast pretty regularly, even during the regular season, outside of draft season. NFL media does like a media call with him all the time. So if you don't check out Daniel Jeremiah stuff, it's a little shout out to him. Definitely do it. So I think Rousseau is one of those guys. Any of the cornerbacks, Patrick Surtain is, most people's number one cornerback. The linebacker out of Notre Dame, Ryan, stay calm. Jeremiah Awusa Koromoa. I think that any of the two big running backs as well. I think there's going to be a lot of interesting names that people are going to kind of be like, as it gets to 25, 26, if there's a couple of those names still there, people are going to get really excited. What about you, Ryan?
Well, when the Senior Bowl first rolled around, I mentioned Kadarius Toney as one of those players, and I know he's a wide receiver, and I know it's not a pressing need, but he has the speed of John Brown. He can be that weapon on the field on offense, can handle kick and punt returns. He can do a little bit of everything. So if he somehow falls to number 30, I think the Bills should consider it. But this does say dream player, so I'll say Kyle Pitts. Start some rumors about that tight end. He doesn't put his shopping carts back when he goes shop. Stuff about him out there. And maybe he'll fall
for a second. Did you notice that when you said Kyle Pitts, I just kicked you out of the chat for a second.
Well, it's not happening, but he said dream. I can dream, right?
I love it. I'm just keeping you on your toes. All right, here's another P. Will here real quick. should the Bills call the Bucks about OJ Howard if the price is right? And honestly, was it you? Somebody put this, I can't remember who it was. I kind of like the idea of maybe, oh no, it was Sal put out a tight end story. More so than Howard, he's just never produced, and at the level of which he was drafted, and I think the price might be a little bit higher than this one might be. But I'd call Cleveland about
David
Njoku, yes. That kind of to me is a little bit more. I mean, if you can get him for maybe a 6th-round pick, I guess at this point OJ Howard probably wouldn't command much more than that. But if you're Tampa, are you really eager to trade Howard as a potential weapon in that offense? I don't know if you really are. I know you got Gronk, and I think they're probably going to move on from Cameron Brate because there's some cap savings that can be had there. I would say Howard probably sticks around in Tampa and would cost more.
I just think there's other options that you can get in free agency, that might give you as much bang for your buck. I know that Jonnu Smith was someone that I mentioned in my article. If he's too pricey, Gerald Everett can be had a little bit less, at least in terms of what Spotrac has for him. Dan Arnold's a guy that I'm a big fan of if you want to run 12 personnel, and he would be even cheaper than those guys. And then Matt and I have already delved into the Kyle Rudolph talk if he is released by the Vikings. Someone that I still think can be a very good pass catcher, but also now has some experience really being a blocking tight end too, so can kind of be that all-around guy for Buffalo.
All right, we'll take this last question here from the Lone Wolf. He's always in every show. We got to make sure we get him on here. Do you have enough confidence in AJ Epinesa taking a decent step forward next season to make a reasonable impact for the defense? And I think that's kind of like a nuanced topic because sure, there's the question, do you believe in AJ Epinesa enough to make a step? And sure, you can have that confidence. But do you have the confidence if you need to move on from, say, a Mario Addison? Now, that kind of gets funny because you probably don't move on from Mario Addison if you're not bringing in another high-profile pass rusher. But I think we saw enough in the second half of the season from Epinesa to kind of foreshadow a big jump in year 2 when he has a full offseason, potentially rookie minicamp OTAs. We still don't know what that's going to look like, if it's going to happen in a traditional manner. But I think that, I'm very high on AJ Epinesa moving into next season. I still think they need a dynamic, athletic, force. I don't know if that's really Epinesa's trajectory. I think he's probably going to be more of that Phil Hansen mold to a Bruce Smith type player, just to give Bills fans an analogy that's familiar to them. Phil Hansen was a great pass rusher. He was a great defensive end. He was great against the run, but he wasn't that electric sack getter on his own. Where I think that I think AJ Epinesa has a fun ceiling, but it's not really a ceiling that's going to. I saw somebody mention in the chat, elicit fear. A defensive lineman that strikes fear into an offensive coordinator. I think the Bills drafted Ed Oliver to be that guy. I think he's got to be the guy that takes that monumental step into year 3 and becomes a real interior force. And I think that can potentially happen to a degree with Starr back in the mix and him just going through a full season where things didn't go right. How much did Ed Oliver learn from this year? I would imagine it was quite a bit. And so I'm excited to see that jump next year too.
Yeah, I think Epinesa can take a reasonable jump this year. Now, I'm not saying that he's going to take that jump to be to leapfrog a Mario Addison if they don't land a J.J. Watt. But I think you're going to see enough out of him that he can be a valuable part of that rotation. Another thing you have to consider is this year the Bills asked him to drop some significant weight, play at a different weight than what he was used to, and he had to train to get down to that weight, and he had to do a lot of different things. So he's going to work this offseason on figuring out how to play it that way and what pass rush moves work, what don't. What can he do now that he couldn't do 20 pounds ago when he was that much heavier? So I think that his arsenal is going to develop a little bit. If you do bring in a J.J. Watt, though, I think that he could even take a bigger step. He's already said that he wants, J.J. Watt is the player that he emulates. If you can actually bring J.J. Watt into the room, have him learn from him on and off the field, I think that can bring that development up to speed even faster, and then you can get even more production out of him. So that's the other thing that a guy like a J.J. Watt brings. It's not just what he would bring on a 1, 2, 3 year deal. It's what he could do for AJ Epinesa 4, 5, 6 years down the road from now.
Somebody on Facebook put a little angry emoji.
I see that.
Come on, man. Like, or woman. Why? Why do you put the hate emoji on there? Everything that we were bringing you tonight was to, elevate that level of understanding. We learned a lot tonight, and we do this all day long, 365. Come on, stop the hate. Put a little love on that video. If you're watching on YouTube, thank you so much. To everybody that watched tonight, thank you so much. I'm just joking around. It's getting late. I'm tired. Hit that subscribe button if you're watching on YouTube. We would really appreciate it. Find us on all the audio platforms, Spotify, Stitcher, Apple, Google, all of them, wherever you listen to podcasts. Because listen, we just did an hour and a half show. I'm not gonna sit here and imagine that we had everybody tuning in for 90 minutes to the live edition. But guess what? If you download on the audio edition, it's going to be up there in about the next 15 minutes or so. You can download it and kind of listen to it at your leisure over the course of the next couple of days. We really appreciate all your guys' support. It's been such a fun year, and we got a fun show next week. I can't give you too much because I got a little bit planned tomorrow that is kind of going to preview it, and I don't want to give it away because whoever's involved might be watching. So it's a long story short, but I just don't want to give it away. Final thought, Ryan.
Yeah, final thought. Thanks for the continued support. Maybe the angry face is because the show's ending. Maybe they're just like, oh, I don't want it to end, so they're angry about that. That's what I'm going to base it on.
There it is. Oh, somebody hit the love button. See, listen, we got the best viewership on the internet in terms of Bills video consumption. We appreciate you guys, man. This has been so much fun. I like this. Brian, you came up with a cool new little deal at the end here, a little quick fire Q&A. If you're listening and you kind of want a little bit more detail on what happened, you can always watch right here on YouTube or Facebook or Twitter. Just check them out. All right, we're going to get out of here. We will be back. If the Bills sign J.J. Watt, we will be live almost instantaneously, unless Ryan's in class or something, but I'll probably be live. That's what they're going to do. They're going to do something funny where it's just absolutely just horrible timing. But I'm going to be on the road driving to Cooperstown. If something happens, I'm going right from the car. We're going to get after it, and we were going to talk about that. If not that, we will be back next Wednesday for a monster show. Tonight we went an hour and a half. That show is going to probably be 2.5 hours. So listen, eat a late dinner, bring some snacks, maybe some popcorn. You might be in and out. I understand it's a long show, but it's really fun. I'm excited about the whole idea, and we'll get after it. So for Ryan Talbot, I'm Matt Perino. We will see you next week.